In the majestic kingdom of Dor, where grand castles kiss the sky and the scent of soup once filled the air, a tiny, extraordinary mouse was born. His name was Despereaux Tilling, and he was different from the moment he opened his eyes. His ears were enormous, almost comically so, but what was truly remarkable about him was his heart, which was even bigger. While other mice scurried and hid, learning to be afraid of cats, traps, and the bright light of the human world, Despereaux was busy reading books, yes, reading. He was captivated by stories of chivalry, of knights in shining armor, and of beautiful princesses. He didn't want to nibble on book pages like his family. He wanted to devour the words, the adventures, the courage they held within. His father tried to teach him the proper way to be a mouse, to cower, to scurry, to be invisible. But Despereaux couldn't help himself. He was drawn to music, to light, and to beauty. One day, while listening to King Philip play his guitar for his beloved daughter, Princess P, Despereaux was so moved by the melody that he broke the most sacred rule of all mice. He revealed himself to a human. He fell hopelessly in love with the princess, not just her beauty, but her kindness and her sadness. For this crime, for refusing to live a life governed by fear, the Mouse Council made a terrible decision. They sentenced Despereaux to the dungeons, a place from which no mouse had ever returned. The dungeon was a pit of darkness and despair, home to the rats. These were creatures of the shadows, their hearts hardened by betrayal and bitterness. As Despereaux was cast into the abyss, a single thread was tied around his neck, a symbol of his exile, held by the jailer, Gregory. But even in this terrifying place, Despereaux's spirit refused to be broken. It was here he met another soul living between light and shadow, a rat named Chiaroscuro, or Roscuro for short. Roscuro was not like the other rats. He was fascinated by the light, drawn to the world above, a place he yearned to belong. Roscuro's story was a tragic one. Years ago, drawn by the joy of a royal banquet, he had accidentally fallen from a chandelier right into the queen's soup. The shock was so great that the queen had a heart attack and died instantly. This single, unfortunate event cast a long shadow over the entire kingdom. The heartbroken king, in his grief, outlawed soup, forbade the use of spoons, and banned rats from the upper castle. The sky over Dor grew gray, the sun refused to shine, and a perpetual sadness fell upon the land. Roscuro, filled with guilt and rejected by the light he so loved, retreated to the darkness of the dungeon, his heart growing bitter. He came to resent the Princess P, blaming her for his pain because she had looked at him with disgust in that fateful moment. Meanwhile, in the world above, there was another story of sadness unfolding. A servant girl named Miggery, so often called Mig, had a simple but powerful dream. More than anything, she wanted to be a princess. Sold by her father for a red tablecloth, a handful of cigarettes, and a hen, Mig was clumsy and not very bright. Partly due to the constant clouds to the air she received from her uncle, her dream of royalty was a desperate wish for a better life, a life where she was seen and valued. It was this desperate desire that made her vulnerable. Roscuro, his heart now twisted with a desire for revenge, saw Mig as the perfect pawn. He manipulated her, whispering promises that if she helped him, he would make her a princess. Their dark plan was to kidnap Princess P and trap her in the dungeon, making Miggery, so the princess, in her place. Back in the darkness, Despereaux learned of this wicked plot from the dungeon's jailer, Gregory. He overheard the rats planning to drag the princess down into their miserable world. His heart, which had already fallen for the princess, was now filled with a fierce determination. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't a knight, he wasn't strong, and he was just one very small mouse against a horde of vicious rats. But he had read the stories. He knew that courage wasn't about size. It was about the strength of your spirit. He had to save her. Escaping the dungeon was his first impossible task. With the help of Gregory, who cut the thread from his neck, Despereaux made his way back to the world of light. He tried to warn the Mouse Council, to rally his own kind for help, but they were too afraid. His own father, Lester, turned him away, too terrified to break the rules. Despereaux was truly alone, but his resolve didn't waver. He went to the castle's kitchen, where he found the castle's cook, a man who understood stories and soup. It was there he armed himself, not with a sword, but with a sewing needle for a rapier and a spool of red thread. The thread was important. It was a thread to find his way back, a thread of hope in the labyrinth of darkness. With his tiny needle held high, Despereaux ventured back into the rat-infested dungeons. He followed the mournful cries of the princess and the cruel laughter of the rats. The darkness was absolute, but Despereaux remembered the stories. He knew that even the smallest light could defeat the greatest darkness. He confronted Roscoro, who was gloating over his victory, with the terrified princess and the bewildered Miggery so at his side. The rats swarmed, ready to tear the little mouse apart, but Despereaux stood his ground. He was no longer just a mouse who loved a princess. He was a knight on a quest. He fought with the heart of a lion, his small needle a blur of silver. He challenged Roscoro not just with his weapon, but with his words. He spoke of light, of forgiveness, and of soup. He reminded Roscoro of the beauty he once craved. It was Princess P, however, who truly turned the tide. Instead of cowering, she spoke to Roscoro. She offered him something he had never truly been given: forgiveness. She understood his pain and his loneliness. She offered him a place in the light, not as a creature of darkness, but as himself. At the same time, Miggery so realized her mistake. Seeing the princess's kindness and Roscoro's faltering cruelty, she understood that becoming a princess wasn't about wearing a crown, it was about having a noble heart. She defied Roscoro and stood with the princess. The rats' plan crumbled. The other rats, seeing their leader's change of heart and the united front of a princess, a servant girl, and a tiny mouse, faltered and scattered back into the shadows. The light that Despereaux carried in his heart had finally broken through the dungeon's gloom. He led the princess and Miggery so out of the darkness, following the red thread back to safety. When they emerged, something miraculous had happened. The smell of soup was in the air. The cook, inspired by the mouse's bravery, had defied the king's law and made a kettle of delicious soup. The aroma wafted through the castle and out into the kingdom. The king, drawn by the forbidden scent, found his daughter safe and sound. Seeing her, his heart, which had been frozen in grief, finally began to thaw. The return of the princess, the smell of soup, and the story of the brave little mouse brought the light back to Dor. The clouds parted, and the sun shone brightly for the first time in years. The king learned to forgive, just as his daughter had. He forgave Roscoro, who was allowed to move freely between the upper world and the lower, a bridge between two realms. He reconciled with Miggery, who was reunited with her long-lost father and finally found a true home. And Despereaux, he became the hero of his own story. He wasn't a knight in shining armor, but a mouse with a sewing needle and an unbreakable spirit. He sat at the table with the king and Princess P, not as a pest to be shooed away, but as an honored guest and a dear friend. The kingdom of Dor learned that day that love is more powerful than hate, forgiveness is stronger than revenge, and that even the smallest creature armed with courage and a good heart can bring light into the darkest of places. The story of Despereaux, the little mouse with big ears, became a legend, a tale to remind everyone that heroes come in all sizes. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more tales of adventure and heart.